Hey there, everyone. We're here today to talk about Magician Apprentice, Book 1 of Raymond E. Feist's The Riftwar saga and cycle. The saga is just the first few books, the cycle is over 30 of them. I read these a long time ago and really loved it. Heck, when I read it, it was just one book, Magician, but it was split into two later. And so, Zach, you read part one of the book. What do you think?
I am disappointed about the fact that I actually think I like it.
Ooh, I love that. Okay, I want to know more, so we'll get to that. We are Fantasy for the Ages, father and son who talk about fantasy, science fiction, and other nerdy things we enjoy. Today, solidly in fantasy, and this is classic. This stuff goes way back to when I was reading as a young man. Is that part of why
That's
you
exactly
have
why
some
I'm
mixed
disappointed.
feelings?
That's exactly why.
Tell me more.
Because generally speaking, a little bit older fantasy often doesn't land with me. It falls into some tropes and some styles that I don't always love. I'm like, I understand it, but it doesn't carry the nostalgia factor for me, so I can't excuse certain things for it.
Uh huh.
Um, this book, it flowed and read in a way that like I recognized it was older fantasy, but it read with a relatively modern syntax. My brain didn't have to like adjust to how people were writing in the 80s or something. It's like
Okay.
no, it was written in kind of a fantasy lingo vibe, but a early 2000s how people wrote fantasy vibe.
So you're saying Feist's writing was perhaps ahead of his time?
And not in like content, but in how the actual sentences flow, which is a
Okay.
big thing for me. Just can I enjoy a book? Is can I read it comfortably?
Some people would, like you, look past this series because it started so long ago. And there are so many books to it. He just finished 2 or 3 years ago. He finished the saga, the cycle of Riftwar. As I said, there's over 30 books. I've read them all. I think they have a fairly consistent level of quality all the way through. I mean, little dips and rises, but it does start really strong.
That's one of the other reasons I'm disappointed that I kind of liked it, because I think I may be interested to read them all, but that's a lot of books to read.
Yeah,
And there's a lot of good books out there to read. So I guess I just have to fit these in eventually because
there
I
you
enjoyed it
go.
enough to keep going,
Although,
probably.
compared to a lot of fantasy you're familiar with, these aren't as long as some books that are out there.
They're not as short as you remember them, though.
What was this one? Like 450?
450, 500, but that's okay. I'm going to call you out here. Your average book was just over 300 this past year. Mine was about 500, a little over. So that is a relatively normal sci-fi or fantasy length. That's not shorter than normal. It's just it's not a Stormlight archive. It's not
It's not Malazan.
1200 pages. So
Okay.
no, it's not a massive tome, but just because it's not huge doesn't mean it's small.
So, for people who have not read this before, what's the basic gist of this book starting out?
You've got a relatively feudal system that is interesting and has its own politics here and there, and you follow a kind of a nobody that is just trying to find their way in the world and ends up being a magician's apprentice kind of by default and circumstance. And then things keep happening that are interesting and different, and suddenly maybe there's people from another world, and maybe that's a problem because they're coming to conquer or something. But also there's like elves and dwarves and a dragon and
A lot of fantasy
a lot of fantasy
development.
classics that are in kind of classic fantasy ways with new elements tied in and a little bit of like almost sci-fi
Yeah, you say a
vibe.
rift from another world? That
Yeah,
sounds a
and
little
when I say another
sci-fi.
world, it feels very like there's another planet somewhere world.
Whoa,
It's
yeah.
a almost wormholey thing activated by magic. Um,
Interesting.
I can't explain too much about it without being spoilery, but you
Science
simultaneously
sufficiently
have
developed is viewed as magic by others.
Yeah, we have a relatively interesting concept of a world with a relatively interesting concept for conflict into that world that is completely other and unknown.
Okay. So it definitely interested you. This little nobody, we can name him. We're talking about Pug.
Pug,
What a perfect name for a little
Pug.
nobody. Pug.
He's just a little dog, you know?
Yeah, but he's no dog. He is a good boy, but he's no dog. Any other particular elements of the story that you really were intrigued by, interested in, or didn't work?
Yeah, Carline's just annoying.
Kind of supposed to
She's
be.
kind of supposed to be like it's one of those things where like I get that everyone's attracted to her because she's attractive, but she's not an attractive human being
Not a nice
in
person.
personality, and that's
Yeah.
it gets better,
Is
but
that caricature done, stereotypically, or is it just makes sense because of her upbringing and her age at this point?
one of the reasons I think Feist is successful with this book is he sets up a lot of things where people fit into tropes you expect. There are these roles in like a medieval village system that you expect, and you're like, they're going to act this way. And it totally makes sense and it's totally clear. And then he continues to be like, yeah, but they are more than that. There is more to them. And you start to actually get to know them. And the things you get to know, while they don't conflict with those tropes, they do make them more interesting by differing from them.
Nice. Well said. And that is an aspect of Feist's writing that makes it more interesting. Better than the standard boring fantasy fare. Not that I find a lot of standard boring fantasy anywhere. I just love fantasy, but this is better than the average.
The
Yeah.
biggest problem with this book is that it's half a book.
It
And
made sense when it was one big, but it
I
was a big book.
this is one of those cases where publishers thought Americans were too stupid
Yep.
because the Brits said, "No, we're going to keep it as one book." It's in
Yep.
America that it's two books, and
The Brits did it right. Those of you who follow us over there, we're acknowledging it.
I understand where they cut it works because we got two like different arcs, but it's not two different arcs. It's one that you don't get the full story of even the first book unless you carry that through.
Yep.
But if you do, it works well enough as a standalone if you don't want to go read the rest of the saga or cycle.
Okay. Of course, you did continue and keep reading, so we'll be back soon with another Book Blast spoiler-free review on Magician Master to see what Zach thinks of the finish of really book one.
Yep.
But this is a good spot to stop then for today. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to tell us. Click that like button. And if you haven't subscribed, we hope you will. Thanks for being here. We'll talk to you next time.